Robert Hutchinson is the 2016 chairman of the Alachua County Commission. He served one term more than a decade ago and has been serving a second term since 2012. Hutch has lived most of his life in eastern Alachua County, went to undergraduate school at Emory University, and attended graduate school in urban and regional planning at the University of Florida. His career includes working in local government, the nonprofit sector, academia, and in business. Along with his wife and pack of rescue dogs, he loves hiking and boating, and he has played keyboards with the band Weeds of Eden for decades. Welcome, Hutch.
Thank you very much.
So, you're the only commissioner who's ever served 2 different centuries. So, what's the difference between serving in the 21st century and the 20th century?
Well, there's probably 2 big things. One is how the commission works itself and the communications, and the other is the issues. Actually, even predating when I was on the commission, I've done various bureaucratic jobs for government agencies, and it was kind of like the Mad Men era. I mean, I was one of these guys who wrote stuff out on legal pads, took it down to the typing pool, room full of women who would type it up, and you'd sit there and wait for it, and it would come back, then you'd mark it up and send it back down there, and stuff like that. And so when I got elected in '98, well, and then I, of course, evolved with the computer era like many people did. Well, '98, when I was elected to the commission, I walked into my office, and I'm looking around, and I said, "Where's the computer?" And they said, "What do you mean? None of the commissioners have computers." I said, "I kind of have a computer." And okay, we'll see if we can sort that out. And so the first computers arrived for me and Commissioner Newport and I think Penny Wheat and the other commissioners. And it was a real adjustment for people to get used to the fact that we would type our own stuff or do our own email, because prior to then it had all been handed off to typing pools. And this was only 1998.
So just in time for Y2K, you ushered in the computer.
And so, and of course with that came email and then all the other communications. And so the difference between then and now is today, with wired in with the iPhones and the iPads and the computers and all that sort of stuff, it's like a fire hose of information requests and knowledge that's out there, and that's what's really changed, because back then it was like mostly reading paper that came by us and that sort of thing. The issue, so that's sort of like how's the job done, that's really different.
Right.
But then the issues are, when I was elected in '98, the issues were, for me anyway, largely about growth management and environmental protection, and we did land conservation and things like that. And the whole world of social services and related issues were out there. They were important, but I didn't really pay that much attention. When I ran in 2012, for some reason I said I wanted to make my issues about mental health and substance abuse and criminal justice reform and that sort of realm, homelessness, that area of social service issues. And when I said that, I had no idea what I was talking about. And so I did the deep dive when I got elected, and what I can say is those issues are incredibly interesting, incredibly important. It's important to have a person on the commission who pays attention to them, and it was kind of like I caught the wave of interest in mental health issues and the problems of the mentally ill and homelessness and how all that relates. So I've been fascinated by it. I now serve on half a dozen different boards or committees related to that, and I'm hoping that I'm making a difference.
Well, speaking of issues, there have been a few issues that have been, a great deal of interest has been generated publicly, so we thought it would be a good idea to get together and talk about some of the kind of big rock issues that are floating around right now. And why don't we begin with the Waldo Job Center, with the recent hearings that took place with the Plum Creek sector plan. Plum Creek, now Weyerhaeuser. They, great deal of public interest, 4 public hearings to gather and give time for the entire citizenry that wanted to comment on it. So out of that process kind of came an idea that you put forward. So can you tell our viewers about Waldo Job Center?
A lot of what Plum Creek was talking about and tapping into was the real need for economic development on the east side. And And I believe in that. I mean, I grew up in Eastern Gainesville. I've seen as retail and residential and job opportunities have left the east side. And so what Plum Creek was proposing is needed, and the problem is where they were proposing it, in my opinion, and the opinion of the majority of the commission, was in the wrong place. And so I didn't want to just vote no and tell them to go away, because frankly we need Plum Creek and we need the ideas that they have, and they're a huge landowner. So as folks would come in and talk to me about the needs in eastern Alachua County, and I talked to probably 100 people in my office over the course of the last couple of years, it really became obvious that the Waldo Road corridor was the place where Plum Creek's idea needed to be put. And kind of simultaneously I started studying Talcachali and what was its situation. And today Talcachali has 1,100 employees. It has 379 clients that they're serving. It has a budget of $58 million. It sits on 400 acres or more, and yet the state is systematically disinvesting in that property. A third of the buildings are empty, another third aren't really being fully utilized. So
for those who don't know about Talcachali, can you?
Well, it's a agency that is run by the state of Florida called the Agency for Persons with Disabilities, and it's for people with profound intellectual or physical disabilities. So they take care of them there, and they do a great job. My concern is there used to be 6 such institutions around the state. We're down to 2, and the model now is group homes and other ways that people take care of the disabled. So my concern is for the 1,100 jobs that currently exist in eastern Alachua County. The largest employer is Talcachali, and potentially losing those. So what I want to do is make it so enticing for Talcachali to stay there by rebuilding or renovating their facilities and otherwise making them a more viable operation if the state doesn't move.
There are a lot of moving parts to this. It's a fascinating plan. I've had the privilege of sitting in on it when you've explained it a couple of times. You know, the parts seem to be, in terms of the Plum Creek land, there was the Hawthorne annexation, which the county commission took a hard look at but chose not to oppose. There's the fairgrounds, and I know that part of what you've been talking about is a swap with Plum Creek and some of its lands for the fairground. And then how many acres is Talcachali?
It's in the 400 to 500 acre range, but altogether there's 2,500 acres of state land in eastern Gainesville, and so in eastern Alachua County. So the proposal really is to try to take the same ideas or similar ideas that Plum Creek was proposing out on the Hawthorne Road, move them to the Waldo Road, do part of it with land swap between Plum Creek lands and county lands like the old fairgrounds property, part of it with swap to state lands. Part of Noonan's Lake State Forest, the Division of Forestry says they're willing to surplus that again. They surplused it 4 years ago, and they'd willingly do that again. Part of it may be for taking some of the proceeds of a state's purchase of Plum Creek lands, applying some of that or using that as financing to build a new facility for Talcachali. So you're right, there's a lot of moving parts, no single one of which is all that complicated, and we've done things like that in the past. And so if we can kind of timing-wise put it all together, I think we end up saving the Talcachali jobs, getting a state forest out of the deal, having a more efficient use of the fairgrounds property for redevelopment where it's needed, and ultimately having a job center that maybe the University of Florida or Shands or some other organization helps us with in terms of making it something that will help East Gainesville.
Well, and you're putting it right where the people are.
Exactly.
And you've got infrastructure and transportation, and you know, it just seems to make so much sense. I know you've had a lot of meetings. You've generated a lot of interest. You've taken several trips to Tallahassee. Who have you met with up there?
Well, we've worked a number of the agencies, from the governor's office to the Florida Forestry Service, Division of State Lands, and I'll be up there soon talking to the ARC committee, which is the Acquisition and Restoration Council. They're the ones that approve projects to go on the state land acquisition list. And what I can say is I thought this might take a few years. Right now, at the rate things are going, I'm hoping by next year we are in a situation where the major pieces have been resolved. It still is going to take many years to complete what's being talked about, but the Plum Creek sector plan was a 50-year plan as well. So I'm hoping that all the ducks keep lining up the way they are. So far, nothing has not succeeded that we've tried, so we'll see how it goes.
What is the next step for?
Well, the next step is to work the land acquisition portion for the Plum Creek lands, and there's even private investors willing to be involved there, we think. It's working the land swap for the fairgrounds and a piece of Plum Creek's land. It's fully understanding what the Agency for Persons with Disabilities wants to happen to Talcachali. They've been the ones that are a little hard to figure out, and I'm not sure they exactly know where the agency is going. There's 1,100 Talcachali workers who, in my opinion, deserve to have a little more assurances about what their future is. And so to the extent that they have been placed in a situation of not knowing what the future is, that's not really fair to them. So I'm hoping that the agency continues to work with us and we come up with a plan that works for everybody.
Why don't we switch gears a little bit?
Sure.
And I know mental health is a very important issue to you. There's some interesting things happening in county government with mental health first aid, and I know you're working closely with the manager on that.
Well,
tell us
mental
about
health
that.
first aid is a 8-hour course usually that teaches people what to do in the event they're experiencing somebody with a mental health crisis, anxiety or depression or schizophrenia or something like that. And it's really intended to be similar to life-saving if you see somebody drowning, or CPR if you see somebody having a heart attack. It teaches you those skills that you need to keep yourself safe and the person safe until you can get professional help. So when a person takes mental health first aid, as I have, it does a couple things. First, it gives you those skills, but it also destigmatizes mental health. You learn a lot about it. You learn how prevalent it is, that 1 in 4 people are going to experience a mental health crisis at some point in their life. And it teaches you all of the resources that are in the county that you know that you can access if you need it. So it's a good thing, and my hope is, and I'm working on a compact with all of the major agencies in the county, that the university will either encourage or require their students and faculty to take mental health first aid, that the VA will roll it out to their folks, that we know that the county manager has made it a priority for county employees to take mental health first aid, and probably the city will follow. Sheriff Sadie Darnell now has 71% of her sworn officers who've had crisis intervention training, which is sort of an advanced version of mental health first aid for law enforcement. So there's a lot of buzz about this mental health first aid, and if the Mental Health Coalition of Alachua Counties has our wishes, we would have 20% of the people of Alachua County who will have taken mental health first aid by the end of the year 2020.
I know the board has recently invested in a new organization, the Peer Respite Center.
Sure.
Tell me about that.
The Gainesville Peer Respite Center, first of all, peers are people who, in this context, are people who have the lived experience of mental illness. And what that means is they're a person who has gone through treatment, is in some form of recovery, and has gone through a fairly rigorous training program so that they can help others. And what a peer respite center is a place where somebody who's experiencing an extreme emotional state, something we might call mental illness, would come to this center voluntarily, and the person that first person they meet, and everybody that works there, is somebody who's been where they are.
I see.
And can say, look, I'm here to help, but we're going to do this together because I'm not a professional expert who's going to tell you what you need to do or what you need to take. We're going to work on this problem together. And you can stay for an hour, you can stay for a day, you can stay for a week. And so it helps people work through the issues that they're dealing with and teaches them those coping mechanisms that really only somebody who has been where they are can do. We will be the first peer respite center in the state of Florida. We'll be only the 20th in the nation. It'll be on East University Avenue. We hope to open, I'm going to say, in probably August or September, and it's really, really exciting.
Is this an overnight stay, or do you
Up
come
to a
in
week.
for up to a week?
Yeah,
Okay.
and we expect that, I mean, the experience of other peer respite centers is many people drop in for a day or an hour or something like that, and there'll sort of be group sessions and individual sessions. We don't even call it counseling because that, in the mental health world, sort of presumes the guy sitting there with the clipboard and somebody on the couch and that relationship.
Right.
But it's much more about mutuality, and we're working on each other's problems together.
Well, I can tell you're excited about
Oh yeah,
this
it's going to be awesome.
one. The county, I know, our main provider for mental health services is Meridian Behavioral Health Care. Tell me a little bit about the Commission's funding of that and what they do.
Well, Meridian is the mental health provider and also substance abuse provider, sort of last resort. So if you don't have insurance, or you are picked up by the police or whatever and have to be Baker acted, you go to Meridian. And Meridian does a great job on incredibly limited resources in helping people. I think they have 12 different programs, everything from substance abuse programs and detoxing to various kinds of mental health treatment and so forth. They really help diverting people out of the criminal justice system and into proper treatment. You know, Florida has the very shameful rank of 49th out of the 50 states in terms of per capita funding for mental health services. And so Meridian feels the brunt of that, whereas in some states, a person with mental illness will spend $160 a day treating them. In Florida, I think it's in the $30 a day range. And so the kinds of services that we can provide are nowhere near enough, but Meridian does a good job. And there's a number of other providers, and actually what's interesting about Alachua County is that, first of all, we have a wealth of different organizations, and they all cooperate. And so when somebody ends up at Meridian and they really would be better off somewhere else, the Meridian staff are the first ones to say, let's get you to where you can get the best help. And where some places really compete or they don't cooperate, but in Alachua County, we have a great network of really caring people who understand what each other's fortes are and try to move the folks to the right place.
I know that we were selected to be part of this kind of a mapping project for mental health services. Tell me about that. Yeah,
there are two things that Alachua County was selected for. One was a governor's order that said we want you to map all of the mental health services in Alachua County. And by mapping, it's where does the money come from, where do the patients come from, where do they go to, what services are provided. And so what we're doing is we've kind of drawn this preliminary map, but we're taking I think it's 8 patients or people, sometimes patients, sometimes they're in jail, whatever, and we're going to track their route through the system, because there are people who've literally been in the system for 30 years, in and out of jail, then the Veterans Hospital, then Meridian, then homelessness, and what we want to do is understand where the system has failed so that we can, and where we've succeeded so that we can do a much better job. The other effort is what's called the Stepping Up Initiative, and that's a consortium that includes the National Association for Counties, but also the American Psychiatric Association and some think tanks. And what they have done is there were 2 counties from Florida selected, Alachua County and Miami-Dade, and there were 50 counties nationwide that were selected as practitioners to come together, and we were together for several days in Washington to see what we are doing to get the mentally ill out of jail. And right now in Alachua County, let's say we have 750 people in our jail, 230 of them are on psychotropic drugs, which means they have some sort of mental illness. Right. And that understates the percentage of people with mental illness, because there's a bunch who aren't on their drugs. So we know that there's a prevalence of people being locked up with mental illness, and we know that they don't get the treatment they need out there. I think our jail does a pretty good job in terms of prescribing the medicines, but there's no real long-term therapy or anything like that. So anything we can do to get folks out of the criminal justice system into the treatment system is kind of what the Stepping Up initiative is all about.
I know that the county has the Metamorphosis House, and that's an overnight stay. Do you know the details?
Well,
of
it's a lot longer than overnight. I mean, people that go to the Metamorphosis House, which is kind of the halfway house for drug rehab and when you're working your way back into society, I think the average stay is more like 6 months. So it's a residential program, and it's a lot of kind of intensive group efforts and exercises and cooperation and that sort of thing, because one of the interesting conclusions that somebody's recently come up with is the opposite of addiction and addictive behavior is companionship and relationships, and that typically a person who ends up with a significant substance abuse problem, that's evidence of difficulties in their personal relationships. And so some of those sort of evidence-based models are being used now in addiction recovery. And I think we do a pretty good job at Metamorphosis. There's always room for improvement. I know that at Meridian they have a lot of folks, including women who've been addicted to crack cocaine, who are pregnant, and they're having their kids. And fortunately, we managed to have either zero or very few cocaine-addicted babies born in Alachua County because we're so proactive in finding the women and getting them help.
Switching gears one more time, a lot of attention being paid to the I75 Relief process, and it has kind of become known that part of this process is leading to possible paths through Alachua County for new roads. What is your take on the I-75 relief process?
Well, first of all, what they're thinking about right now, and by they, it's Florida DOT, are routes between Tampa and Jacksonville, or alternately to figure out how to at least swing through Marion and Alachua County on a route that doesn't cause more congestion and problems on I-75. So while those may be laudable or purposeful transportation goals, the problem is a major 4-lane road becomes extremely disruptive. If it goes on the east side of Alachua County, there's a lot of environmentally sensitive land and other constraints, lakes and wetlands and wildlife corridors and so forth. If it goes on the western side of the county, it goes through our prime agricultural land and some of our sort of more upscale subdivisions and so forth, and we already have a big road over there, so there's not that many places where you run roads parallel to one another. So I think most people who've studied the situation carefully believe there is a solution within the existing corridors of 301 or of I-75 or of 41 or 27 or any of the other roads. There may also be future technological options. There's going to be a lot more self-driving cars and trucks. There may be truck-only lanes because a lot of the problem on I-75 is increased truck traffic.
Right.
There may be, I mean, there's all kinds of solutions out there that we don't quite understand yet, and so my hope is that we don't rush to laying out some corridor and all the implications that that has before we fully understand that there may be a better solution.
Tell our viewers a little bit about the Commission's intentions with Wild Spaces Public Places.
Well, first, sort of the history. In 2000, Alachua County Forever was passed, and that was a property tax, and that rolls off this year, so we're no longer paying that property tax. In 2008, the original Wild Spaces Public Places was passed, and that was a half-penny sales tax for 2 years only. That was, the first one was mostly land conservation. This one was roughly half park improvements and half land conservation, and then a few little special gems in there like the Senior Recreation Center. This one is more like that second one. There's going to be a lot of the money will go to municipalities for parks. There may be a couple special projects in there, fairgrounds and so forth, and then a big chunk of it's going to go for land conservation. First, the land conservation part, we probably have one more cycle like this to acquire the pieces of land that are really necessary to preserve in Alachua County. I have always viewed the development of counties in Florida as a race between developers and land conservationists, and we will get to a place at some point in the near future, maybe not in my life, but not far beyond it, where every parcel of land in Alachua County has been spoken for, either as future development or land conservation. There won't be just land sitting out there not knowing what's going to happen to it.
Right.
And so I view it as a race between conservation and development, and that we're doing a pretty good job. We're developing, we're conserving, and we're going to end up in a good place if we do this right. And I also believe that we should not be telling people so much what they can and can't do with their land as saying, if we want to preserve that land, then we, the citizens, should step up and buy it. So that's the conservation part of it. The park part of it is mostly the urban parks and cities, and all the cities will get something. They'll fix up their parks. It'll be a good thing.
And it's important to remember that over 70% of Alachua County voters voted for Amendment 1,
right.
Which was a land conservation, water conservation, statewide ballot initiative. And Wild Spaces Public Places will actually give the commission the ability to draw that money down through matching funds. Yeah,
the record in Alachua County for the first two programs is 2/3 of the money that we spend is actually somebody else's money,
right.
State, federal, or private donors. And so having that pot of money to attract other funds is actually good for us. And of course, since it's a sales tax, 30% of that's coming in from outside of Alachua County. Right. People passing through and so forth. So in many ways, it's the best bang for the buck that we could possibly hope for.
We're down to about a minute, and I did want to mention that you've got a great idea for some local music.
Well, for those of you who watch Channel 12 frequently, you know that there's that the board that kind of floats by, and it tells you what what employment opportunities there are and how to recycle your garbage.
The bulletin board.
Bulletin board, right. Yeah. Well, right now it plays some generic music from God knows where. Well, I think that should all be local music. And we've got great local music. We have the Chamber Orchestra and the Symphony Orchestra. We've got Tom Petty, and we've got Stephen Stills, and we've got bands like the Weeds of Eden. But what we need to do is have all of that be local music. So I'm all about making that happen. We need the cooperation of the city of Gainesville. They share the Channel 12 with us, and the cooperation of our local music producers, and we'll make this happen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good. Thank you very much. Enjoyed it.
Appreciate you being here.